As a reminder, I'm broadcasting through the Zoom meeting. I think I have it set up now that you don't have to wait for me to admit you. I think that should work, but we'll see as people start joining. Hopefully, it'll automatically just let you into the room. So, a couple of things I wanted to talk about before we get going too much today. I'll go ahead and turn this off. Um, Okay, before we jump into here, a couple of things you may have seen. There's some flyers hanging up. One of them is for the Let's Talks. Just wanted to remind you that that's a thing. The other is for ice cream. That is also a thing. And apparently, I had to pull it up so I could get the details. Edge Club, you probably met if you were at the kickoff meeting last week. For the incoming freshmen, you remember Sierra standing up and telling you a little bit about Edge. Well, if you're interested in sort of starting to get involved with that, they are bribing you with ice cream. So there's an ice cream party and game night Friday, tomorrow night. That's what it says. That's what the poster says. Yeah. I don't know if it's actually a board game night or if it's a.
Well, I know.
I'm still not
thing
complaining.
It says if you got
I have a lot of
card
card
at
games at my
orientation.
room.
Yeah, good point. So
Card at orientation.
so it's tomorrow night, 7:30 in this room. They're gonna have some ice cream. They'll have some games. Gonna have a lot of people from the Edge Club that are usually sophomores, juniors, seniors, and that way you can start getting involved with that. The people like Sierra, who is the president, like she got involved, I'm sure, when she was a freshman. So this is your opportunity if you wanted to get involved in some groups in terms of leadership. She also put on here, if you received an Uno card from their booth over the semester or over the summer, bring it with you. I have a feeling they're going to do something with that.
They wanted to do like a full, like they take all the Uno cards and make a game out of it.
Oh, okay, that's neat. So did anybody get one of those? Anybody know?
That's why I knew.
This looks fake. Let's ignore that. So, it's from a number that ends in 1,000. So this is somebody got really lucky when picking out phone numbers. Really, it's still making me admit you all one at a time.
This looks fake.
This looks fake. All right. So go get ice cream. Moral of the story. Unless you're even if you're lactose intolerant, I bet they'll have a lactose-free version.
Is that even considered ice cream?
Yeah, it's actually pretty good. You'd be surprised. There's some good ones. The lactose-free yogurts are really good too.
Coconut ice cream is amazing.
Huh?
Coconut ice cream.
Oh, coconut, that's different.
See, now I want ice cream, and instead we're going to do So now instead of having to admit people, I have to take them off of hold. I don't know what that even means. Is it letting people in? Are you able to see stuff? Okay. So I'll still continue to do that. I got to figure out how to fix that. This is what is it?
Halo Top ice cream. It's like a low calorie version, and it's just as good as regular ice cream.
Ooh, Halo Top ice cream.
They sell them by the pint, and the most calories you can get by pint is like 360.
Really? There's an interesting ice cream alternative, which is if you freeze bananas, you can like sort of puree those, and it turns it into like this vanilla or this banana like fluff stuff that is actually really good. And they sell a machine to make that called the Yo Nana.
I have it.
Yeah, the Yo Nana is pretty awesome. Yo Nana is like
It's really good with peanut butter.
it's really good with peanut butter. Exactly.
Yo, man.
Yo Nana. It
It's
is.
such a funny name.
I know, like, but it was yeah, we had like two of them because we wore one of them out. So, all right, so I know that's why you paid tuition, was to hear this story.
Yes.
Let's talk really quickly about what's going on for the rest of the week inside of D2L. Obviously, the directions, the checklist, you've already sort of looked at that stuff. We're going to be going through the rest of what's in the video lessons here. Anybody using those as sort of backups to the class? Like you're going back and watching those supplemental? Cool. That's good because those all have audio. And I was just informed that last class video, apparently the audio cut out halfway through it. So I can't really account for technical issues that happen. What I will say is I teach this class often, so you can probably keep scrolling down the YouTube channel and eventually find another session where I taught a similar class. But also these class videos are probably a little more organized and brief versions of what you're getting in class too. So again, the discussion, show us your progress. I wanted to remind you all of that because there are quite a few people in there who have posted, but those are the initial discussion post is due tonight. So just a reminder. Again, the way I usually grade those, the discussions is your initial post is worth 3 points. Each additional post or each of your comments are worth a point each. And you know, if you go over 2, then your reward is in heaven. So, so you can keep like chiming in. What I would say though is I don't want you to think of these discussion posts as a chore, right? Don't be like, I have to do these 3 things to get my grade and then I can, because what that results in is, yes, I agree with your comment, like, and that helps nobody, right? Like the point of this is to kind of get you chatting a little bit, getting you talking about some of this stuff offline, because I recognize some of you like to talk out loud, some of you like to type. Like some of you feel a little bit more comfortable in virtual social spaces, right? I used to use a different version of this. It was kind of like a social media thing called Band for my classes. And I had 2 back-to-back classes one semester. One of them I came in and the entire class just talked out loud to the whole thing. Like it was like it was constant banter and back and forth. And then I went into the and then I looked in the band folder and there was absolutely nothing in there, right? Nobody had even opened it, right? And then I went to my next class and it was like crickets. Nobody would say a word out loud. And I was like, oh man, I'm just not getting through to them. And then after class, I looked in band. It's because that's where they'd been talking the entire time, right? And there was like 30 posts in there. People were sharing examples of what I was talking about. So everybody's different in how they communicate. But that doesn't mean you're an either or, right? You need to be good at both. And so there's a lot of good stuff in the discussions, hopefully that, like, sort of treat those as a chance to socialize in another format. You can socialize in your pajamas there, right? And I guess technically you can wear your pajamas to class if you wanted to, but that's more of a junior, senior thing, I guess. Okay. You'll get to that point to where you're like, no, not putting on pants. I want pajamas today. Okay, nothing other than the discussion post is really due today. What you would notice in week 2 is, I have the assignment that we went over last class period, what we're actually doing all of this for, right? But that assignment isn't due this week. In fact, it's not really due next week. It's due, we have all of next week to work on it, and then it's due the first class of week 4. So be ready to bring it in for that. We're going to talk a lot about lighting and rendering next class, or next week. Lighting and rendering is something to not be underestimated. How many of you have had to render already? Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh. Right, there
Last
you go.
night.
I quote you. Oh my
3
gosh.
hours. 4 computers.
3 hours? Oh, you got it easy.
I know. I only rendered it to 20
Yeah. I had a render when I was in college. This is actually for a personal project I was working on. 3 weeks. Non-stop on my computer at home over the summer. I'd worked on this thing I wanted to make. And I'm like, I'm going to render it. And then I couldn't use my computer for 3 weeks. I just let it sit there and churn away on it. I was super proud of what I got afterwards. So.
I would be so scared.
Yeah. Oh, it was terrifying. Like because the way I was rendering it was a bad idea too. It was rendering straight to video. So if it crashed or like the electricity went off or something, I would have lost the entire thing. But live and learn. That's
You live on the edge.
Famous.
I'm a rebel. I render fearlessly. Okay, so So we're going to hop back into Maya. How many of you were able to get a car you liked modeled or some sort of vehicle you liked modeled? Ooh, how many of you were able to get 3 of them?
I would like to.
I'm doing 3 of them today.
So you'll have 3 of them in your final piece. Recognize you can have 3 similar ones. If what you want to do is just sort of duplicate them, maybe make a couple little changes, and different textures or something like that on it, that's okay too. But again, everybody's going to find the thing that they're really enjoying, and I want you to run with that. I want you to have fun with this. Like I'll say this: if you're thinking of your digital media classes as a chore, it's like I don't really want to do that. I'd start flipping through the catalog and find something you do want to do, because this is not an easy major, right? I'm hoping that within one of your principles classes, you're going to find the thing that makes you go, ooh, cool, that's awesome. And then when your friends call and say, hey, you want to go watch a movie, you'll be like, no, I can't. I'm excited about working in visual effects. That's when you know you've picked the right major, right? And it will come. I think you'll start to find the thing that really pulls you toward that. All right. So in Maya, I'm going to open up my bridge scene, the one with the car in it. How do I do that?
Can you go to file open? Set project.
Set the file, set project, and then I'm going to go find it. So for me, it's on my E drive under Greg, bridge, hit set, and then I'll go to file, open scene, and mine was 03 here. Don't save. There we go. Y'all remember this one. So I'm going to go ahead and make 3 more. I'm going to do mine kind of quickly. So I'm just going to grab all of this. And I think, can I just hit Control D? I can. If I hit Control D, I get a whole other car. Move it over. I'll do it one more time. So I have my 3 cars ready to go. I'm going to turn on our bridge. All right. Actually, let me go ahead and get some stuff up here for me to reference as I go. All right. So I have all of these things in here. Got my car layer. Turn those on and off. Right. In fact, I'll go ahead and yeah, that's fine. I got my bridge layer. Go ahead and name it too, just so we know what it is. And I'll go ahead and add. No, I won't. I'm going to go ahead and add these things to their own layer, just so I can turn them on and off if I want to. And I'll call it space control layer, CTRL layer. I did that because I don't really want to open up new versions of Maya over and over again to sort of make little examples. So now I can quickly hide stuff if we're going to talk about things. Okay. All right. Animation is what we're going to mainly be focusing on today. And when I say animation, like, I guess we can think of that in a couple of different ways. Like, if you ask somebody, like, what kind of movie is Moana, like, everyone's, oh, it's an animation, right? But there's a lot of elements in that, right? There's the modeling, there's lighting and rendering, there's all that in making an animated film, right? What we're going to be talking about today is animating, like making something move, right? In this case, in a digital world, but animating actually comes from that phrase, bringing to life. It's to invoke life or to breathe life into, right? It's the same thing that animal comes from, right? The root word of that. And so that's what we're going to be focusing on today, because we finally got some objects put together. We've got a world ready to go where we can start animating, where we can start making things move. That is the primary element of what is in the animation concentration as you go through it. All these other things, modeling, lighting, modeling, texturing, like stuff like that, all of those add to it, but really at its heart, it's about learning how to make things move, right? And most people come into this with the assumption that that's going to be super easy, right? There's like some buttons on the computer that make it move for you, right? And that is true. So there are some buttons that make it move, right? It's really, really, really easy to make something move in Maya. It's really, really, really hard to make it move in a very specific way, right? So it's easy to make crappy animation. It's hard to make good animation, which I guess is probably, you could probably just replace the word animation with almost anything there, right? But that's the thing I want to, first, I want to give you some ammunition for the people who tell you that a computer is doing all of this. No, a computer is just a tool, and I'm going to teach you how to use that tool, and the next 4 years of your life are going to be learning how to use that tool well, right? Or to create something good. So, teaching somebody to animate, very easy. Let's create a ball. I'm going to do this. Feel free to follow along with me in either an empty Maya scene or in a scene where you've hidden everything else. Right? So I have a sphere, right? I need to make this sphere move from one side of the screen to the other side of the screen. So I can move it over here, right? Let's say this is where I want it to start. We have a timeline that represents the forward progression of time, right? We already talked about the timeline the other day, right? Frame 1, that's the beginning. Frame 120, we're animating at 24 images in a second, 24 frames a second. Right? Now the thing I want you to recognize about this ball is I moved it over here, and so that means now all of its translates, rotates, scales, they have a specific value to them, right? Like if I set this to, let's do something more round, -8 and 2, right? If I created a second object here and set that to -8 and 2, they're going to be in the exact same location, right? They're like right there on top of each other. So those values represent that location to this ball. And so there's a reason that we kind of use those is so we can, again, we talk about the Cartesian coordinate system, so we can all communicate that number represents that location, right? And that configuration in terms of scale, rotate, right? So all animation is in Maya is a series of markers, or a series of, like, think of them like as bookmarks, right? For those values on your timeline. Now that may not make complete sense, but we're going to call those keyframes, right? So on frame 1, again, very easy to animate. I moved the object over there. You already remembered all those. W-E-R, yes?
I think I broke mine.
You broke Maya. That's a possibility. I think Maya was broken when you found it. Yes. Sometimes actually it's if you hold down a key for too long, sometimes it kind of gets stuck. And sometimes like you can figure out which key it might be and tap it a few times. I don't know if it's physically getting stuck or if it's like Maya's just not reading it as being released yet. Oh yeah. So you go to create, nerds primitives, and then choose a circle. And then you open up, sort of scale that up to the right size.
No, you can't make a room.
And then you're gonna modify,
Oh, maybe. I know you can.
freeze transformations. So that's zero,
Yes.
and then you're going to parent all of your model objects underneath that. So you would highlight all of those, and then in the middle you want to drag them.
If you do come, I'll leave
Probably want to highlight.
for somewhere.
You'll need what?
That we don't control. There you go. Now if we move the curve, it's showing.
I can't even scream.
Go right click on the object. You're gonna do the option mode.
Like a whole.
And then you're gonna go to mesh. That breaks them apart. It's just a weird line. I'm gonna keep some of this. And yeah, I'm also I just go get things.
Do I get any wet? I have gravel on my chest. I made a face. There's gravel on my chest.
Okay, sorry, what was it?
To get through.
How did you?
Yes.
Probably got it.
What you're looking for.
That's the one I'm looking for. Thank you so
This ain't my first rodeo. Okay, so animating in Maya, right? We have this. Is everybody able to get into the room? By the way, the Zoom room. If you need to do the Zoom meeting, Zoom room.
I'm in the front of you.
All right.
I don't know.
Is it not admitting you, or is it?
Oh, I didn't know.
Okay, yeah. If you need to get into it and like for some reason it's not admitting you, let me know. Because I tried something different. Okay. Those values represent where our object is, the orientation, the size and shape of our object, right? And this number 1 here on our timeline represents a point in time at the beginning, right? Like those numbers each represent a different point in time. So all I have to do to sort of set a bookmark on those, or what we call a keyframe, is press the S key. So you already know how to move stuff, WER, move, rotate, to change all those values. So with it in this location, I'm going to select my sphere, I'm going to press S. So, the way I remember that, S as in setting a keyframe, right? It sets it. Now, when we say keyframe, we're key as in essential, right? Like that is a key element of your presentation, right? Not unlocking a door key. Yes.
I took like an animation difference class, you know what
Yeah.
I mean? But it's been a while, but isn't keyframe like the frames that you do first before you add an animation?
So
okay.
you'll see why that is in a second. So as you pointed out, in traditional animation, you'll hear, like when people are drawing it, you'll hear people talk about keyframes. That's the drawing that you would do to allow you to transition from pose A to pose B, right? Your character is got their arm up in the air. You need to transition to down here. You would do those 2 drawings first. You'd do the up in the air, the arm down, and then you would do the in-betweens next, right? So we'll kind of talk about that here in just a minute. So I've set a keyframe on there. I've set a marker in time on frame 1 that says that's where I want this ball to be on frame 1. I want it to be -8 in translate X, and translate Y, I want it to be at 2, right? So I'm going to change my time. I'm going to go from frame 1 all the way out here to the end, right? Frame 120. Now, let's say on frame 120, I want it to be somewhere else, right? Let's say I want it to be over here. Well, I just moved it, right? So you would hope that that means it's animated. So let's scrub our timeline and see what happens. So I didn't press S. So recognize what I had done is I moved it, and I'm changing these values in the thing. I can make all sorts of changes to this, right? I can really mess this thing up, right? But I am not telling Maya to set a marker on that, right? I'm not setting a keyframe. I'm not saving all of those changes I just made. And so if I scrub my timeline, even though I've made changes to these numbers, Maya's going to default back to the last instruction I gave it, which was make sure it's set to -8 and 2, right? So if I want to make another keyframe, I have to hit S again. And if I go over here, move it to here, let's set it a round number at 10, right? If I wanted to make that transition, I have to hit S again. Now notice the things that change when I do that, right? I get a little red tick mark on my timeline where I set those keyframes. You'll also notice that my channels in my channel box are all red now too. So that's how you can know if something is animated or not. If these colors are red, that means you've set keyframes on it and now it's animated. If they're bright red, that means you're on your keyframe. If it's a lighter pink color, it means that it's animated but you're not on a keyframe. So now if I scrub through my timeline, you'll see Maya is going to transition for me. So we talked about keyframes. Okay, my keyframes in this are frame 1 and frame 120. Just like in my traditional drawing examples, my keyframes are my arm is down, my arm is up, right? Now in traditional animation, you needed those transitions in between. And the way that people got those was they hired an assistant, right? And the assistant did all of those less important drawings. So like the keyframe animator, the main animator, may have done frames like 1, 5, 7, 12, 15, and then they would put some marker on the drawing to say, this is how I want it to transition, and then they would hand that off to an assistant, and that assistant was sort of training to be a keyframe animator. They were called an in-betweener, right? Well, Maya is our assistant. Maya, we've done 2 drawings, right? We've done 2 images. We've done frame 1, we've done frame 120. Maya's like, all right, I got it. I can do those other 118 drawings for you, right? 118 locations for you. The problem with that is Maya is actually not very smart. Like, I mean, no offense, Maya. You do a lot of stuff really well. Maya is going to give you the simplest solution to whatever you ask for. And sometimes simple is not interesting, right? In this case, the simplest solution is to just make it transition in a straight line, right? So if I hit play, like some of you may have, you'll see I get this. Now, that's not correct. What Maya is doing, because we talked about it earlier, 24 frames per second, right, is what we need to be playing at. But Maya, by default, when you first open it, is just going to play it as fast as it can, right? As fast as your computer processor will allow it. So this is called play every frame. And so if I want to see what this looks like in real time, I need to right-click on my timeline, I need to go to playback speed, and I need to set this to real time. I don't know why that's not set by default. But if I hit play now, you'll see this is my animation. Now, when I say animating is easy, like literally, I could teach this to a 4-year-old, right? I mean, look, I had to teach them like 3 things, right? The W key and the S key, right? Like, kids are smart; they'll figure it out. Because I'm sure y'all are playing against some of them right now in Minecraft. So, yeah.
Hey, I don't know what you're talking about. Who says we're playing Minecraft?
Yes.
I don't know what you're talking
Your model isn't moving. So, you gotta hit the.
I'm training to be a Minecraft animator.
So you gotta keep right there.
Good job,
So here, let's drop the over here and hit S. So now it should try to start maximum.
Oh my god.
I just walked in and just said hi.
Your chest is flying. Oh my god.
Not anymore. When you say your chest is fine, not anymore.
I have a question.
Hold on, I also
Minecraft, or is it about?
a little bit of both.
What's the question?
Is it a good idea to turn on automatic keyframes?
Auto key? Yeah.
Auto key?
So that's what I was going to get to next.
Oh, okay.
So a lot of people have the this is my problem with the way Maya works, right? So a couple of things, like when people tell you the computer does all of it, well, yes, if you want it to look like this, right? The computer does very little, or very like almost all of it. I had to do very little to get this, and like it would be very easy to teach this to anybody. If I want this to look like a realistic bowling ball bouncing across the screen, how do I tell Maya to do that? Now, there are ways of simulating that, but that's not easy either, because bowling ball isn't like a preset, like it's a series of parameters to do with mass and all of these other things. That's called simulation. So, if I want this to move in a very specific way, I have to be in control of it, right? And the only control, like I have taught you like all of the tools that you have to control that. W, E, R, and S. Like that's your palette, right? That's what you get to work with. So that means the rest of it is on you. The rest of it is you have to be the one who controls it. That means you have to understand physics. Yes, that's why it's in the curriculum. You have to understand. You have to understand anatomy because of weight, because of force, right? All of these different things you have to learn so you can be in better control of that. And so, I could teach anybody to animate with those like 3 or 4 keyframes. Let's learn how to make it a little bit of our own, right? So if I wanted to control this transition a little bit more, the only tools I have are more keyframes, right? And so I'm going to start setting some more, right? Let's say I wanted this to kind of arc up and then kind of dip down and come back over to here, right? Well, I can just find somewhere in my timeline and be like, no, Maya, not there. I wanted the ball to be here by this point, right? But this is kind of frustrating because, especially with a character, you may be like moving it hundreds of things. Literally, some character rigs will have thousands of controls, right? And let's imagine I position all 1,000 of those controls into this beautiful pose for my character. And I'm like, I want to see what that animation looks like. And I scrub my timeline and it does that. I'm like, oh man, right? I just lost that pose. Now, luckily this pose isn't hard to recreate. It's that, right? And if I wanted to keep it, I should have remembered to hit S. But sometimes you just forget. So there's a tool for that. It's called the auto key option. So underneath our play button, you'll see there's this little blue thing that's highlighted. But if I go over one more, there's like a circle with a little tick mark in it. You all see that? Maybe kind of hard to see where my, let me pull this up here a little bit. It's this right here. So it's a little circle with a little line in it. And if you click that, you're turning on auto key. Now, what that means is that any values I change will update the keyframe, right? So let's say I wanted to, update the value of my up and down location. I'm going to move that up. That's my translate Y, right? But you'll notice that now in my channel locks, translate Y is the only one that's red. Okay? So that means those other channels don't have a keyframe on them on frame 30, right? Translate X, which is the forward and backward motion, doesn't have a keyframe on it, right? So let me just kind of do something temporarily to show you that. Well, no, we can kind of see it by eyeball, right? Right now, our ball is right here. It's like up here at the top of this screen, right? And it's sort of underneath these two boxes right here. We can see that's the location I want it to be on frame 30. And I may think that I've set a keyframe for that, but I've really only changed that one value. And this is a constant interpolation, right? So if I go over here later to frame 90, and I'm like, no, I don't want you to be there forward and back. I want you to be here, right? Well, I've changed just the keyframe on X. So now my keyframe on 30 is different. Right? I don't know if you can tell that, but it's back a little bit. It's no longer here, it's back here. So when I'm setting a keyframe, what I'm doing is I'm setting a marker in time. Let me undo that keyframe so I can. I'm setting a marker in time on all of the values that I want to preserve in my motion. And for me, I'm an animator, and that means I'm a control freak about animation. I want to control everything. I am the puppet master. And that's how you have to be the one that's in control, because Maya's going to make uncreative decisions, right? And Toy Story 3, 4, whatever, doesn't happen with uncreative decisions, right? You have to be the one making these creative decisions. So I'm going to pin this down. I'm going to nail this in this location and this orientation by pressing S. So auto key saves you from accidentally losing your pose, but I still hit the S key to make sure that it's nailed down. That's where I want it, right? Now I will say that you can manually key certain channels even without auto key, right? Let's say I'm over to here and I'm like, you know what? I want this keyframe to be lower, right? And that's my translate Y, so I can lower this down, and you can see my translate Y channel is changing over in my channel box. So let's say that's where I want it to be, but it didn't have auto key on, so it didn't set a keyframe on that. I can click that channel and right click and say key selected, and just key that one channel, right? But again, we would have that same issue with all of these other channels not being keyed. So if I hit S on that, now with 4 keyframes, I've controlled this a little more. But again, this is like when we were talking about animators in the past, like the drawing type of animation. They were making a lot of decisions to get that performance, and those decisions were in the form of a drawing, right? You have to make that many decisions too. You are the input for that, because every other decision is going to be made by Maya. So really what we're doing is guiding Maya so its decisions are very clear and exactly what we wanted it to decide. It's a time saver. It's not going to do it for you. Yes?
Is there a way that you can look at your keyframes, say you're in the middle of you see one before and after? Do you know what I mean?
Like ghosting?
Yeah.
There is. So that's a good question. The question was being able to see the keyframes before and after. There are tools for that. If we go to our animation tab and we go to, I think it's visualize, we can say ghost selected, and it'll show us like a ghost range, right? And then we can always go to visualize and ghost selected. Now, something I use a lot is I use like a step between, right? So I can hit play and see the entire animation, but sometimes I just want to see what my keyframes were. And it's really slow and tedious to have to click down here and be like, okay, there's one there, and there's one there, and there's one there. So there's shortcut keys for that. You probably guessed that, right? It's the greater than, less than keys, or the period and comma keys. Right? And if I use those, I can step back and forth through this animation pretty quick, and I can kind of step back and forth like this to see, is that transition what I want, right? Now again, you're in control of this, so if you want more fidelity than this, then you're going to set more keyframes, right? Like if you wanted this to feel like it was like wobbling or shaking, you're going to control that just by adding more keys over and over again, right? So let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and delete this ball. And we're going to take that and apply this to our cars here. Now, just so it's a little clearer, I'm going to go ahead and give my cars some different materials. So I'll assign a new material to this. I'll do another blend, and I'll give me a yellow car. Oh, that's an ugly yellow. Let's do something a little nicer. Let's get some orange in there. There we go. That's better. And then I'll get us a blue car. Yep. That's a very sensible blue. Let's go like that. There we go. Okay, so we have these 3 cars. I'm going to go ahead and start animating a scene. Creating some, animating a shot, animating some motion on these, right? So what do cars do? They drive, right? They move forward, right? You would assume that these cars are crossing this bridge. They're driving across this bridge. Now, of course, there's more environment that I'll put in this later. But let's go ahead and have that starting to happen. Let's have, the scenario I like using is 2 cars. One of them's driving kind of slow. The other one tries to pass, but there's a pretty fast car coming in oncoming traffic, so they have to swerve around them, right? So I want to rotate this exactly 90 degrees. Again, I can get in my channel box to find that. If I wanted to just rotate this in Y 90 degrees, 180 degrees. The other thing you can do again is hold down J, and that'll let you snap it in 15-degree increments. About 180 is what we're looking for. And I'm going to go to frame 1 because I haven't done anything yet, and I'm going to set up this car's sort of starting position. So we'll start it here. Now, in all honesty, the thing you all may have realized is like this is one bridge, right? I need some road before and after this. So probably what I'll do is I'll go ahead and extend this just a little bit. I'll grab my road here. I'll hit Control D to duplicate that. I'll sort of drag this out here. Now, a couple of interesting things is if this is 70 units wide, you'll see that if I moved it -70, it's going to snap pretty closely to that, right? Somebody asked that question, can you snap objects? You can. The shortcut key for that is V, will allow you to snap it to other points, but it's going to snap it from its pivot point, right? So if I hold down V and start snapping this around, you're going to see it snapping to stuff there. There's a trick on how you can adjust that, and I can, oh man, that's not what I want. And I can show you that later, but really it would be to move the object's pivot point, right? So if I wanted to change where my pivot point is, again, this is going into it a little bit more, I can hit the insert key, I can move my pivot point to one of these edges, so I can hold down V to snap that pivot point to there, and then I can go back to my move tool. So now my object's pivot point is there. All right, I can do that. And if I wanted to snap it to this corner, I could hold down V and snap it right there. So again, that's a little more than I really want to worry about right now. Luckily, I already have the numbers written down for this, or sort of in here. Control D, I can slide it. I can see that's about 70 units. So since I modeled it pretty precisely, we can do that. So we'll get to some more terrain stuff later. I really just wanted to give it a better starting place so it can be going pretty fast. Right? So let's start here. And so I've just selected the car on frame 1 in this location, press S. Right? This is its starting point. Now I also think I may want this to be a little longer than 120 frames. That's just 5 seconds. I'm going to go ahead and extend mine out to about 200 frames. Let's try that. And then I'm going to go to frame 200. I'm going to take it way out through here. And then again, hit S. Now I'm going to go ahead and turn on auto key just because I like to work with it. But let's watch what happens now. Now the car is going pretty fast through the middle. Okay. I'm going to address a couple of things here in a few minutes that get more complicated. Particularly like how the car starts like kind of slowly, like it accelerates, and then it goes fast through the middle, but you'll see at the end it slows down. And sometimes we don't want that. Right? Sometimes we want it to feel like it's going fast the entire time. Right? The way we address that is a little more complicated. So, yes.
So you said you had S for keyframe, like how do you get to end?
So you have to set 2 keyframes, right? S will set our first keyframe, and then I move my timeline all the way to the end, to here, right? And I had to move the vehicle out to there to get that keyframe and set another keyframe. So, yeah, just hit S again. So yeah, let me go ahead and kind of walk through it one more time. I'll delete this. Again, to delete a keyframe, I don't know if I said this before. I go over top of it, right click, delete. Yes.
I just had a thing that says software problem is caused out of my other.
Oh. So you've had your first Maya crash. Yeah, that screen. You'll have bad dreams about that little thing that just popped up there. There's no real recovery from that. So hopefully you didn't lose too much work. But that's one of the reasons, Control-Alt-S or increment and save. If you make any major steps, save it. That way you can always go back to that point. So yeah, I think that there's no predicting. Like, there are certain things that you can repeat that will make it happen. But usually those are bugs and Maya fixes those. Sometimes it's stuff like your graphics card got overtaxed for some weird reason. Like, you don't even know what it is. And it just crashes for no reason. Maya is it's a complicated software, so keeping it running for a long period of time is a challenge programmatically, right? Like, so expect Maya to crash. Maya will crash. Work in habits that hopefully don't make that a traumatic experience for you.
It said it's saved for a while.
Okay, so yeah, sometimes it will try to save it, and you can reopen it if you had any changes. Keep in mind, it's probably opening it from your temporary files. So then if you start incrementing and saving, it may save those increments in your temporary files. So make sure to set your project again and make sure it's saving your files in the right spot. So, okay. So again, to do this animation, I picked my starting point for my car. Let me get in here a little closer so you can see it. So my starting point for my car is right here. That's where I want it to be on frame 1. So on frame 1, that's its location. I hit S. At the end of the animation, I want it to be down here. So I move it to there and hit S. So on frame 200, I move it down there, hit S. So now I have 2 keyframes, and Maya will transition between the 2. Okay. How you feeling about this?
This is good so far.
This is good so far.
I also
I remember doing this before, but it usually gets stuck fast.
Okay. So again, we know that there's a couple of tools we can use to refine this, right? If I wanted to make it look like this is a distracted driver, I could put like some swerving keys in there where they're all over the place, or they're hitting the brakes a lot, slowing down, right? But let's say I wanted this animation to happen even faster. Right? So this is kind of a verbal quiz time. How do I make this animation happen faster? How do I make the car go faster?
You pull the second keyframe further to the left.
Right. So so keep in mind, 24 frames a second means you're going to see 24 images in 1 second. There's not a such thing as a short second and a long second, right? Like a second is a second.
it's enough seconds.
Right. So if I want it to happen fast, I have it happen in fewer keyframes. Right? And right now it's taking 200 frames to get to the end of the bridge. Right? If I wanted it to happen faster, I could have it happen in 100 frames. Right? Now, I could have set my keyframe at 100 and moved it all the way down there, but I've already set my keyframe. I like that I like the location of the object. I just want it to happen earlier. So there's some tricks to how we can adjust these keyframes. If I hold down Shift and click, it will highlight it. And then I can move it earlier by selecting these little, it's kind of hard to see on those little arrows in the middle of it. I can move this earlier to frame 100. So now that motion is happening in 100 frames. We're getting from the beginning of the bridge to the end of the bridge in 100 frames. And watch what that looks like. Much faster, right? All right. this for some reason is really hard for people to wrap their brain around. And it's that, I think it's that this timeline is so scalable that you think like it's going to play it at a constant rate across the timeline. It's not. It's going to play 24 images in a second, no matter what, right? The only control you have in time is how many of those images you use to make a motion happen, right? And so if I want something to go slower, it takes more keyframes for that action to happen. If I want something to go faster, I use fewer keyframes to make that action happen. If I wanted it to be looking like it's going like super fast, like speed of sound fast, right? Then maybe I would have it happen in like 4 frames, 3 frames or something, right? Right, and we're only going to get 24 frames a second happening on our screen. So that means we're only going to see 4 images of that car as it goes across the screen. Okay. So we got that. Now the car is going a little faster. Let's start messing around with these other cars. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to... I'm approaching each topic slowly because these are concepts that are sometimes kind of hard to digest. A lot of times the easiest way is to kind of work along with me, make those changes. It's okay if you have to throw that file away and start over later. So, to address kind of an annoying thing that Maya is doing for us here, right, is Maya is making the car accelerate at the beginning and decelerate at the end. To kind of see what I'm talking about, if we hit play, you'll see like it kind of pulls out slowly, right? Which is what we would actually expect if the car was stopped. But let's say instead I wanted to look like a cut from a camera to a car that was already moving, right? Well, we can tell, our eye is very attuned to motion. We can tell that it looks like that car is starting to accelerate. The reason we can tell is because of something called spacing. Right? So we're seeing 24 frames in a second. Right? Our timing is how many frames it takes for an action to happen. Right? Our spacing is the distance the object travels in each frame. So let me explain that by just showing you some examples. Look at the distance the object travels from frame 40 to frame 41. In one frame, it travels that distance. It's almost a whole car length, right? Travels a whole car length in one frame. Now, comparatively, look how far it travels from frame 1 to frame 2. Just a little bit, right? So what's happening is the distance it travels early on in this animation, or early on from this keyframe, has a smaller spacing. It travels a smaller distance on those keyframes. And then that distance gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and we read that as acceleration. The object is accelerating in that speed. Again, if I had an in-betweener, I would just be like, don't do that. Don't make it accelerate. Make it go fast at the beginning, right? How do I tell Maya that? That is the real complicated part of this. So I'm always reluctant at this part because this is the part where I scare you away and you go to game design. Because people don't like this part of it. Because you think of animation as like, I'm making art, right? I'm making this beautiful expressive thing. And I'm going to tell you that the way you control that beautiful expressive thing is effectively with a graph, right? With something that looks like it should have came out of Excel. And you're going to be like, well, I don't want to do that. I'm not going to do that. I can still get away without doing that. But you can't. Like the graph. So Maya is a computer, right? It's a software package. It's processing this with math. And all Maya is an interface to prevent you from having to do that math yourself. Right? So you may have seen this before. If not, hopefully the concept will make sense. So I'm going to show it to you by opening up another tool or another editor. Under Windows, Animation Editors, graph editor right there. And it's going to bring up this lovely bland thing here. This is kind of hard to see it in the way the viewport is set up right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch my workspace to the animation workspace. And it will kind of dock my graph editor along the bottom here where you can see it better. Now, this is not the only lesson you will get on the graph editor. So don't worry if this is still a little confusing. If I select my car, you'll see that I get a graph. And I'm getting a graph for every one of my attribute channels. Right? For my translate X, my translate Y, my translate Z, my rotate X, my rotate Y, my rotate Z scale. I'm not going to go through that one. And it's going to generate a graph for that. Now, we're starting off with a very simple animation where we're just animating our car in one direction, right? So that means we're only really adjusting one channel. And for this, I think it was the translate X, right? But you can see that each of these have a graph associated with it. Just right now, that graph isn't changing. So let's just click on translate X and talk about what's happening here. Have I lost you yet? I know, graphs.
I'm working on it.
Graphs. Yeah, it's very bland, right? So here's like, you remember in The Matrix where like Keanu Reeves, Neo, first gets to like the little like where they're all looking at the computers and he's watching all those lines go up and down. The one guy is, I don't remember his name right now. And he's like, you can see that, like you can read that, and he's like, yeah, you learn to be able to see what's behind that, right? I don't really see the graph editor anymore. The graph editor is just a representation in numeric values about the motion I am trying to make happen. And as much as you don't might not like the idea, behind Elsa's performance is a bunch of graphs. Behind Coco's performance is a bunch of graphs. Behind Buzz Lightyear's performance is a bunch of graphs. I should probably choose a DreamWorks one too. Behind Toothless's animation is a bunch of graphs. So what was it? What was the one you were going to say? Shrek. Yes, behind Shrek, yeah, a bunch of graphs. And in case you're like, oh, never mind, I'll just do 2D animation. The 2D animation software has a graph editor too. It's because this is just a smart way to control changing values over time. So you can actually read this pretty easily. If you're thinking about it, our car is just doing one thing. It's moving from one side of the screen to the other, right? And we just have 2 points, or 2 keyframes for that, right? Keyframe 1, where we're at the beginning of the screen. Keyframe 2, where we're at the end of the screen, right? Now, I can zoom in and out of this with my scroll wheel or by holding Alt right-click. Now, if I hold, I'm just going to explain what I'm doing. You may forget this, and don't worry, we'll talk about it more later. If I hold Alt-Shift right-click, I can sort of scale one direction or the other. And that just allows me to zoom in a little bit on my graph so I can see it better. Right?
What was that?
Alt-Shift or Shift-Alt. And that way I can zoom in a little bit more and see it. And so you are probably starting to see why. It's kind of hard to see that curve on this monitor right now. You can probably start to see why it's slowing its motor, easing in at the beginning of this, or accelerating and decelerating. It's because what we have here is just 2 values on our translate X channel, right? I set my first keyframe, and it's up here a little higher, right? I think it was. Let me look at the numbers. Probably, yeah, 84.54, right? So we're starting off at 84.54, and our vehicle starts to travel forward, and you'll notice translate X is changing, right? Like right about here, we're crossing 0 and going into negative numbers down to negative 76.437, right? So I asked Maya to figure out all of that stuff in between, and it did it the only way it knew how. It used math, right? It subdivided that, and then it, like, just from the way the program is made, it realizes that most things slow in and out of their motion, right? Like if I accelerate as I start to move to this direction as well, and the fastest point isn't always the very beginning, right? If the fastest point is the very beginning, noteworthy idea, that usually means there was an explosion beside me, right? Like something knocked me that direction, right? So most things naturally like accelerate and decelerate at the beginning and ending of their motion, and so Maya thinks it's doing us a favor. Right, thanks, Maya. It's like when a kid hands you like a sticky piece of candy, it like dropped on the floor, and you're like, oh, thanks. I'll save this one for later. That's what Maya's doing. It's like, look, I fixed it for you. And we just have to tell it, no, like, that's not what I want, right? So the cool thing about this is there's a lot of tools within this graph. I can grab these keys and I can change it. Let's say that's not where I wanted it to start. I wanted it to start a little bit further along. I can slide that key down, right? I can adjust my animation. And now my animation goes from there to the end of my bridge. The other thing I can do, though, is you'll see that every time I grab a keyframe, I get this little tangent handle. I get this line that is drawn across it. So I can also select that tangent handle and adjust how this easing happens at the beginning and end. So if I did something like this, watch how the car takes off. And then it slows down a lot at the end. So, I've introduced to you what is like the most powerful tool in an animator's arsenal, which is the graph editor. You can control all of this just by adjusting that tangent. Now, selecting the tangent's a little annoying. Usually what I do is like, a lot of people try to click it to select it, and then they miss, and then they deselected everything, right? I use a drag select to select stuff in here. So if I drag select my keyframe, it's selected, and then I drag select my tangent handle, it's selected, and then I can move it. Now, sometimes the easiest way to move that, though, is to actually use your middle click. Because if I use my left click and click it and move, if I miss it, I deselect, right? So if I use my middle click, I can click anywhere in my screen and adjust it, right? Actually, I didn't have the tangent selected. So that's what middle click works like. So I usually use that. I'm sure we'll discuss that again more later. Now Maya has some automatic ways that it will create these tangents for you. And what it's using right now is something that it just calls auto tangent. It says that it thinks it knows where you want it to ease in and out, and it thinks it knows where you don't. And in this rare case, not really that rare, but somewhat rare case, Maya just guessed wrong with auto tangent. So we can change some of the ways those tangents interpolate just by highlighting these keys and choosing a different one. Right? So auto tangent, like all of these right here are tangent interpolations. Right? So auto tangent is what we had. Right? Don't really worry about these next two, but the one I really want is this one right here. It's like a diagonal line with a dot at the top of it. And what that is linear tangents. And linear tangents means the previous key's tangent is pointing at your next keyframe, right? And it's going to try its best to make a straight line to that keyframe in your curve, or in your graph editor. What that means to its motion, though, how many of you can guess what that means to the spacing of the object?
Equal.
Huh?
It's equal.
It's equal. Every frame, the distance it travels will be the same, right? It's linear motion. That's what we say when we're talking about that. And so when we were talking about our spacing earlier, if I go back to here, and look how much we're traveling from frame 40 to 41, probably about a little less than half of a car length, right? And then if I go over here to frame 1, it's traveling about the same distance. So the very first frame of animation, the car is moving at the same speed as it is in the middle and at the end. And the result for that motion looks like the car has been like, he's been driving for 200 miles and he's just got cruise control set on. He's always going to be driving at that speed. So y'all see what I'm kind of talking about here? Okay. I'm going to put the graph editor away. It's, it's okay. I will tell you sort of the natural progression of this for most people is I open up the graph editor, I warn you, it's going to be scary, you're not going to like it, and everybody's like, I don't really like that, but it's not that hard, I kind of get it, right? And then, but you still resist going into it, right? You resist opening it up and be like, I don't want to use that if I don't have to, right? And then eventually you have to, and you realize that it takes a little bit of getting used to, right? We actually do an exercise a little later, a bouncing ball exercise where you have to use it, and you'll fight with it. Fighting with it is how you like figure it out. Like that's the challenge behind it. And once you fought with it for a little while, it will start to make sense. And eventually it just becomes a tool, right? Just like hitting W was your move tool, and you get used to that, right? Opening up your graph editor to adjust some animation is just another tool you pop up, right? And you don't dread it anymore. But you kind of have to work with it to stop dreading it eventually. I will tell you that it's not avoidable though. You can avoid it for a little while here if it's stressing you out, because there's so many other things I'm throwing at you. But eventually we will work it in and you will get used to using the graph editor and you'll realize it's just a really amazing way of controlling your animation. It's just ugly. Like it's just not fun to like look at, right? And eventually that part goes away. You're still just focusing on crafting a motion, or emotion. Yes?
I know you already went over this, but can you go over how to assign a texture to like how you do with the road conquer? Because I have some downloads from the textures website.
Yep. Yeah. So this, I feel like this is probably a good break from the graph editor time anyway. So for those of you who are kind of wanting to remember that, we select an object, we assign right click on it and go assign new material. I'm gonna choose a blend. And so if you have a texture you've downloaded and you wanted to apply to that, right here's my color channel. I click on the checkerboard. It's going to pop up this create render node. And we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but this is where I can choose different things that are not just a solid color to represent my color. If I choose file, it takes me to this file 2 node, and then I can point to my concrete texture or whatever it is you downloaded, and it should apply it. If you don't see it, you may need to hit 6, because remember, 4 wireframe, 5 shaded, 6 texture. Okay. So, back to keyframes. Keyframes are what I'm going to work in the most. These are my bread and butter for making animation. The keyframes are how you sort of create the 80-20 rule, like the 80% of the work is done with 20% of the effort. The 20% of the effort is going to come from the keyframes. I'm going to put a bunch of keyframes in there and craft this like motion. But the motion, although going to be close, is going to feel a little off. The way I fix that element of it feeling a little off is in the graph editor. That's where I polish it. So really think of it as like the blocking part of this, the early stages of development of this is using the keyframes. And then when I'm ready to start polishing it and making it perfect, that's where I use the graph editor. For me, it's about 50% of the time. I will set keyframes for about half the time. I'll use graph editor for about half the time, depending on the type of animation. So I'm going to start animating those other things, these other cars. So again, I want it to look like, I'm going to kind of move my, my blue car way back here. I want it to look like my red car is going kind of slow. And so I'm going to, if it's going kind of slow, then I need it to travel fewer, I need it to take more frames to travel the distance it's going to travel, right? So if I want it to look like it's going slow, maybe I'll start it here on frame 1, right? And then here on frame 200, I'm just going to move it a little bit, like maybe like that, right? And hit S again. So again, I've just set these 2 keyframes, but in comparison, look at these 2 vehicle speeds. See, one's going really slow, one's going really fast. Yes?
If you're using the NURBS curves when to group your objects, do you need to make sure that you're keyframing the actual NURBS?
Yes. So yeah, be careful if you use the NURBS curve. The thing that I did is I put the car meshes in their own layer, so I can just turn off the mesh, and then you make a good point. I think I unchecked that, didn't I? And then I click R to freeze that. So you're right. I guess I didn't have that selected. But you want to make sure that you have that turned off so you don't accidentally select the mesh and keyframe that instead. So even though it looks like I'm selecting the car, when I select the curve, it's still just selecting the curve, not the meshes underneath it. Does that make sense?
I think so.
So it's highlighting it, but it's highlighting it because it's a child of the curve, not because I actually have it selected. Okay, so my car is moving really slow right through here. I feel like that's an uninteresting spot for the motion to be, so I'm actually going to change all of that. Move frame 1 to like right here. I want the point where they pass to be closer to the middle of the bridge. Something like that. There we go. Now this car is accelerating and decelerating as well. I told you I was going to close down the graph editor, so I'm going to show you another way to change that tangent. Okay. So again, if I wanted to delete this keyframe, I could right click on it. We got delete there, but I'm not going to delete. I'm going to go down instead to tangents, and I'm going to set this one to linear. I'll do the same thing to the end here, right click, tangents, linear. So now when we watch this motion, it's like the car is just like slow poking along, right? All right. So I got one more car, and I want that car to be impatient. I want that car to pull up behind the red car, be annoyed, and then zoom around them and go on, right? So, you have a question? Or are you stretching?
Stretching, sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine. Stretch away. Stretch away. So what we're going to do for our car, or for our blue car out here, is I want to have it sort of race up to be right behind the red car, kind of brake a little bit before it gets there, sort of stall behind it, and then pass it. Or maybe it may not brake behind it. I may not have enough keyframes on that for that. So let's go ahead and set those keyframes. I'll start it here at the beginning. Select it, hit S, so that's my starting keyframe. I want it to get up to behind this car pretty early. Now I'm going to ignore where this yellow car is for right now because I can always move that later. So instead I want to move my blue car up to here. Let's see what that looks like. And maybe I want to start it a little closer too, something like this. Okay. I'll move that a little earlier. So again, to do that, I hit Shift, highlight it, and I can slide it around. I'll show you that if I hold Shift down and highlight a range, I can slide the entire thing, or I can scale it as well. And we'll be doing some more of that in a bit. But let's start with this. So it gets up here, it hits it. So let's go ahead and move that back just a little bit, right about there. Right? And I want it to kind of hang out behind it just for a little while. Right here. So it's like he comes up, kind of slows down, and then decides to pass him right here. So I'm gonna, again, the way I kind of figure this out is by subdividing where it has to be, right? So think of it this way. If I'm going to do a little dance from here to the other side of the room, and I'm like, dance, 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 all the way across the room, right? Really the biggest motion is I went from over there to over here on this side of the room. And so I need to know my starting place, my first keyframe, and my ending place, this keyframe, before I can figure out all this little stuff in the middle. Right? I'm not a good dancer. So I'm going to figure out where the car is going to get back into the right lane, or the correct lane, right? So I think I'm going to make this pass happen pretty quickly. So I'm probably going to do it right about there, frame 112, make him go around it. Now right now Maya's going to just sort of shoot through that other car, which means what I have to do is about halfway through this, I have to make it swerve around this car. So I'll just move it over into this lane. Right? So maybe this is where it goes to there. So now what I get is now, again, I'm the one in control of this as the animator. So I want to make sure that this is reading correctly. And right now, there's something that's kind of broken in that motion, right? You've all seen cars move before. What happens is from 80 to 90, my car slides over into the other lane. And that's not really what happens. The front wheels would turn, and the car would lead with the tip of the nose. I'm also kind of hitting the other car. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate my car to feel like it's swerving around it. Right? So I go swerve out. And then the same thing happens here as it goes back over. It's kind of drifting over. I will have it swerve back in. So we get that. I'll maybe make this keyframe happen a little earlier, timing reasons. And then I'm going to have it zoom off into the distance really quickly. Because now the car just sort of freezes. Zoom way out through it. I don't know what I do with it. So what we get now is this. Okay. Couple little things to change about this animation. I'm easing out at the beginning. I'm easing in at the end. I'm just going to grab that keyframe, set my tangent to linear, grab my first keyframe, set my tangent to linear. So now I get...
And that makes it not slow.
At the beginning, it makes it not accelerate. So the other thing I'm seeing, like my car doesn't really feel like it's going very fast beforehand. So I'm just going to make it travel a bigger distance at the beginning. So now it like kind of zooms up here. What's going on? Okay. So I managed to take the idea of breathing life into inanimate objects and make it really dull. So let's spice this up a little bit, right? We want some tension in this, right? Nobody would watch this car interaction for very long, right? One of the, I mean, and if Disney released this, you'd be like, this is boring. Like, why are we watching this for like 10 seconds? Nothing's happening, right? It's not very interesting, right? So one of the things that would make it more interesting if it was a near miss, right? Like this is like the person tried to pass and almost hits the yellow car, right? Yeah, that's not good. Don't do that. Check both lanes. Use your blinker. Wear a seatbelt. So I can do that just with some change in timing. Because my little yellow car passes first, and then we get this, right? Well, let's change that. Let's change the keyframes in which my little yellow car passes. And if I make that a little later, the way I can do that is click in my timeline, frame 1, hold down Shift, click, and highlight this range, right? And so now I've selected all of the keys on my yellow car in here, and I can slide those or scale those. So I'm just going to slide them to happen later to where the car doesn't pass until maybe right about there. Let's see how that looks tension-wise. that was a close one. Now it's a little boring because we see our car just sitting there for the first half of this. Depending on how we frame this, you may not see that. Like maybe the way we're filming this, it's from this camera angle. Right? And we get a little bit more tension in there. Now we can add a little bit more like personality to this. Maybe we make this car overcorrect. Right? Maybe they eventually get back to here. So I'll go ahead and hit S on the keyframe. But maybe when they came back into the lane, they were like, I gotta not wreck, right? So they are going to, that's the voice I talk in when I'm driving. Gotta not wreck, gotta get to work, gotta teach the animations. So swerving like this, and maybe they overcorrect and almost hit the bridge right here, right? We get them way over here, close to it, right? And then they have to like swerve back into this lane a little bit. And then kind of eventually veer back into their correct lane, right? So I'm trying to make this more interesting to watch. Okay. So some things that we could do to make it more interesting, again, we could play with the timing, we could speed it up, we could do all sorts of things to it, right? Keyframes are, they're our paint for this. This is how we are generating this illusion of motion. Yes?
Start right on that, please.
Oh, that's all right.
My question is there any like set of rules or advice we should follow to where we put the keyframes, like timing wise? I don't know. I thought there were like certain like
Numbers? Not really. Well, so what you may be thinking, you may be, there's the animating on ones, animating on twos thing. That's not really what this is. Keyframes are like frames that you're defining a certain motion in, and you really just have as many keyframes as you need to create that motion. Later on, when you're doing something more complicated like a character, humans never really stop moving entirely. And so if you have like 20 frames where it's just drifting, it feels very robotic, right? And so when you're listening to people talk about it, or you're listening to animators talk about it, they'll say something like they have a keyframe every 5 frames or something like that. And that's just a fidelity thing, but everybody works a little differently. Some people put fewer keyframes and do more work in the graph editor. Some people put a lot of keyframes and do less work in the graph editor. Note that I said less, not no work in the graph editor. And that's really an animator preference that you'll develop over the future. And there's not like there's not really a set of rules, but there's the thing to kind of think about is how fast you want that motion to happen, right? And you can start thinking in numbers a little bit, like it takes 24 frames for a second to happen, and you could say, well, how long should that take? Should it be like, I used to carry a stopwatch with me everywhere. I guess now you all do too, and on your phone. But you could try that. You could try coming up with the rhythm you want that to happen at, right? Maybe you're like, oh, it gets up there like that, and then waits, and then the car starts passing, it stops, right? And you could record those taps and see where your taps are, and then sort of use that to get your timing. The other thing you could do, this is going to sound silly, is you get reference, right? You can find probably references of cars driving online, see how many seconds that takes. Or you can act out reference. Like 3 people get together, you be the yellow car, you be the red car, you be the blue car, act that out and see what you want that to feel like to start getting an idea. That sounds silly for cars, I guess it kind of is. Eventually, that's what you'll be doing for everything because you'll be mainly animating living things, right? How long does something take to happen? But it's actually, once you get used to adjusting your keyframes, it's really easy to start seeing, like, if I slide this later, 1 frame later, oh, that looks better, right? And just kind of playing around with that. So, you had a question? All right.
Does it have to be specifically like this type of animation that we have to do for our bridge, or can it be something like outlandish? Because like I have an idea, but and another question was, can we deconstruct like the ropes to where like the ropes snap like a car driving off the bridge or something like that?
Okay, here's what I'll say.
Yes.
Minimum, you have to have 3 vehicles of some sort animated. I've seen people choose motorcycles, I've seen people choose helicopters. You can do whatever you want to. Anything on top of that, if you also want a dinosaur,
Wrong.
dinosaurs, I guess, could be construed as a Stone Age vehicle. If you can find one and ride it, right? Fred Flintstone style. But anything on top of that, just great, right? That's you liked animation. Just like some people like modeling, they're going to put more work into the cars. I'm never going to say, no, you can't do more. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So yeah, if you want to run with this, make it something completely new. Sort of the minimum is, I need to see a bridge of some sort. I need to see 20 vehicles. Right. And
Can we deconstruct like the ropes on the side to where we can make them like snap apart, or is that like something different?
may you or can you?
How? That's the question.
How? Yes, you could. It would be a little bit of extra work, like simulating stuff like rope, fabric, fire, smoke, all that stuff. Yeah, but what you could do is you could fake it, right? You could have like one where the rope is, one model where the rope is broken, one model where it's not, and you could hide and unhide one and then animate the pieces. Right? You could have like the broken one where it's frayed, and then the unbroken one, you hide the unbroken one, turn on the broken one, and then animate it flying apart. So you could fake it, and so you can find ways of trying to do that.
Or you could just make the car small enough so they fit through the gaps instead of flying.
Well, funny enough, the vehicle I was going to do is like an amphibious vehicle. It drove off the bridge, but it lands in the water just fine. That was my plan.
I thought maybe you were going for like the Mothman prophecy type thing.
Actually, that would work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like I should embed stuff like this, like 5 extra points for Mothman. Okay. So the last thing, although we like seeing this, and this one's actually this version of Maya has made this somewhat irrelevant, but not really. So I'm going to show you anyway. So I'm going to hit stop here. You'll notice this little thing right below the play button, this little check or the little film strip with the play button, and it's highlighted. You'll also notice this blue line that goes across our timeline here. Those two things didn't used to be in Maya. As of last semester, they weren't in Maya. This is really nice because what is happening is it's called animation caching. So what's happening is even though I haven't hit play, Maya is figuring out what's going to happen in all the keyframes before and after it, so it'll play back smoothly. And so it's trying, they've tried to make it optimized to where when I hit this play button, what you see play back there is going to look exactly like the final animation in terms of speed. The reason that's important is because if you have a slower computer, in the past when you would hit play, it would drop frames. It would like skip some frames because your computer wasn't fast enough. And what you were seeing playing back in your viewport wasn't always accurate. Sometimes there's still reasons to turn that off, but if you turn it off, let's see if it chugs a little bit more. If it does, it's not going to be much. So you may kind of, no, I don't think it's really dropping very many frames. But when I turn that back on, it sort of recaches everything, so we get to see it in real time. In the past, the only way you could see it in real time was to make a movie of it, like make a video of it and watch that video. And that was called play blasting, because they felt like they needed to invent a word for preview. Like other programs call it an animation preview, and that's how you can think of that. Is creating a play blast is creating an animation preview video. So there's still reasons to do it, as you may want to share this video with a friend, right? You're like, hey, check out this thing I made, right? And send it to them before you render it. Or maybe you want to bring it down to my office, or send it to me in an email to ask me a question about it, but you got all these textures hooked up into it, and you don't want to break that by just sending me the Maya file. So you can play blast it so I can see it as a video. Considering video is what we're going to eventually be putting this out to, it makes sense, right? So the way we create a play blast is we right-click on our timeline, and we go to play blast, and then I'm going to choose my little options box here. So I think we've talked about this, but at any time in Maya, when you see something in a menu that has that little box at the end, that means that there's some options you can change on it before you create it. If you see an arrow, it means it expands out into more options. So Play Blast, I'm going to choose the options box. And there's some stuff that I need to change on this. Now, I always tell everybody this in class, they miss several steps of it. So under content in our D2L page, you'll see this Play Blast settings, and these are the settings I'm going to use. So a couple of things I'm going to change. I'm going to change my format to QT, and I'm going to change my encoding to H.264. This may give you some issues. If you're doing this at home, QT stands for QuickTime. QuickTime used to be like pretty standard. Everybody downloaded it and used QuickTime to watch certain types of movies. Apple stopped supporting QuickTime, and so now not everybody has it installed. So sometimes you have to install like some extra drivers or something like that to get that to work, and I can show you that later. But QuickTime is the format, which is going to allow us to make basically an MP4 file. It's really an MOV file, but they're very similar. And H.264 is a codec. It's a compressor for that video. So this is the best quality video you're going to get at the smallest size. So I get this saved in here so you can always refer to it. I want to turn my quality up to 100, and I'm going to change, I don't know if this is from render settings, change my scale, and then I'm going to click save to file. So again, let's look at that really quick. Under AVI, I'm going to choose QT. Under this drop-down box, you're going to see H.261, H.263. Oh no, I don't have it. If you scroll up, for some reason, it's up here. H.264. Quality. I want to take that all the way out to 100. Display size from render settings. My scale, I'll turn that all the way up to 1. And then I want to tell it to save a file. Now, I know you're getting tired of hearing me harp on and on and on about setting your project. But if you haven't set your project, who knows where it's going to save that file? So make sure you set your project before you do all this stuff. And if you do, it should put it in your movies folder in your project. So you'll see Bridge Movies. So if I hit Play Blast, it's going to make a little preview of it. And it's going to ask if I want to open this. I do. It's all right. It's doing it on the other screen. I'll move it over when I get to it. There we go. So now I got a little video file I can send to my mom, and she'll be like, I'm so proud of you. So a couple of things. Those little rings around there are annoying. So is this grid, right? Like that's not supposed to be there in real life. So a couple of things I can do. I can hide my control layer. Really? So if I have my control layer, it's apparently hiding my car too. Like, that makes sense why it's doing that. So what I'm going to do instead is under Show, my menu up here, I'm just going to uncheck NURBS curves temporarily, and so it won't show them in the viewport. And I'm also going to click this little button under Show here for the grid. And so now those two things aren't on there. And so now if I Play Blast again, it'll just copy over that previous file. And I have a wonderful video file I can send to people or post in my discussion board, right? So if you're wanting to post this in your discussion board, you can always post this on YouTube and like post a link in there. So if this is the progress you've got to and you haven't posted it yet, here's a way of getting to that point. So yes.
So tonight the discussion doesn't have to be like on Twitter yet? Or?
No, it's just wherever you are.
Okay.
So it's like just share your progress, basically.
Okay.
So what I'd like to get is, I believe that's what it is, how it's posted. I mean, I expected that everybody had at least the minimum of the bridge put together, right? So if you posted on day 1 of this week, that's probably what you posted. But yeah, show us your progress. So it can be a link to the car animation, or it can be an image of like, maybe you've spent more time modeling, you haven't done as much animating yet, maybe you worked around with the textures, and you just want to show off where it's at right now. Now the reason for doing this is you're posting these to share your work, The other part, the reply, is the important part, right? So everybody, I mean, the first part's important too. Everybody's going to look at that, and then they're going to give you feedback, right? And this is something that's going to take a little while for you to get used to, but that looks great isn't helpful feedback, right? Like, if it does look great, that's cool. Feel free to tell them. Things that are helpful is how can I make it better? Everybody can always make it better, right? So on both sides of it, it's going to be hard for you. You're going to feel like uncomfortable saying, you know what, that car looks a little wonky in the back end. Maybe you should lower that. Because that feels like criticism, and everybody thinks criticism is bad, right? And from the other person's perspective, they're going to be like, they don't like my car, screw them, right? But that shouldn't be how it is. Like, you're offering help on how to make it look better. You should receive that as, how can I make this look better? If you're not trying to get better, why are you in school, right? Yes?
Before we add the extra stuff outside the cars and the bridge,
Mhm.
when should I have like the cars and the bridge done? Basically, like when are we starting the other stuff?
So I would aim at trying to have the cars in the bridge and like the animation on it like this. Try to aim at having that by next class period, because that's when we're going to start on building some more stuff in the environment, working on a little bit of effects stuff kind of, and some rendering. And so that would be a good point to be at if you're just trying to like sort of pace yourself to make sure you're not falling behind. I'm not going to check any of it for a grade along the way. The discussion is just an opportunity to get feedback from your peers, basically. Questions? Comments? Yes.
Can you tell me more with this section?
Yes. Give me 1 second. Let's see if there's any overall classroom questions. Other questions? Yes.
So, well, I can look at the video. I just had to refresh myself on the rigging part of getting all the objects to move together. Animate.
Yeah, basically, I'll show you really quickly in the
I don't know how.
in Maya. I created the NURBS curve, which is under create NURBS primitive circle. And then once I did that, I parented other objects under it, all the car objects under it. And you can do that by highlighting them and then middle click on them and drag them on top of it. Which I'm not going to do that because it'll mess up my bridge. But does that make sense? Okay. Other questions? How y'all feeling so far about this? Are you enjoying it?
Pretty good.
Is it fun?
Modeling is really relaxing, I'm not gonna lie.
Modeling is really relaxing.
For me, yeah,
Interesting.
I've already made 3 things in this like hour.
You found your zen.
Yeah.
So, okay, so complete honesty. I'm not going to get mad. How many of you are really not liking this? Anybody?
I don't want to say, I like the animation part. The modeling is the.
Yeah. This is interesting. Like side by side, we have
I'm the
conflicting.
other one.
Like, no, so that's
Wanna
fine.
team up?
Yeah. So that's the thing to watch for. It's okay if you don't like this. We'll work you through it. What I would say is don't get scared off because you don't like it. Well, let me rephrase that. Don't get scared off because you don't like the software package. You should feel like, oh, this is hard. Why isn't this coming easy to me? There's a chance that like a lot of things have came easy to you. Like maybe drawing felt like it came easy to you. The first little while of this is going to be a little bit of a struggle. That's not, everybody goes through that. Everybody fights with it at the beginning. But if we get halfway through the semester and you're like, you know what, I'm just not digging Maya. This is not my thing. I don't like it. Like, listen to that voice because you're probably in another class, or maybe you'll be in another class that's like, you know what, I didn't think I was going to like visual effects, but I'm liking this video stuff, right? And I think it is important to recognize that, you may have left high school being like, you know what, I'm going to go be an animator. And now you're like, I said it, I got to do it. But no, don't go through something that you're not enjoying. Find the thing that you're enjoying doing. And I think that you're going to get better at it. Now, just because it's hard doesn't mean you're not enjoying it. And so give it a chance, fight through some of that hard stuff, and see if it's giving you like a positive feedback loop. If it feels good to make those models, if it feels good to make that motion happen, then yeah, keep running with it. So I want to keep reminding you that one of the points of this class is to find the thing that you're liking doing, that you want to do more of, right? This is sort of that's the point of it. It's sampler. Other questions? Comments? All right. Well, we got a little bit of time left. Actually, no, we don't.
2
We
hours.
got, huh?
We've got an hour.
An hour? Oh, yeah, that's right. This class is 3 hours long. That's right. So yeah, you got till 2:05. The rest of the class is actually yours to do with as you want. You're welcome to work on the project. You're welcome to finish playing Minecraft. You're welcome to run the cookout. Whatever it is you want to do, the rest of the time is yours to do as you wish. I'm going to go ahead and upload this video, and then I'll hop around. I know some people had some questions, and I'll help you out with it. See if the sound worked on it this time. All right.
Yeah.